Hi everyone, I'm Kenny Coogan, the Education Director for the International Carnivorous Plant Society, or the ICPS. The ICPS is dedicated to sharing knowledge and news of carnivorous plants, supporting conservation efforts, and promoting research and cultivation. I'm excited to be joined by Rob Cantley, and we are here at his nursery, Borneo Exotics. Rob is the co-chair of the IUCN SSC Carnivorous Plant Specialist Group, and that, of course, stands for the International Union of Conservation of Nature Species Survival Commission. Today, we're going to be talking about Nepenthes conservation and carnivorous plant conservation in general. And thank you so much, Rob, for participating. Thank you for being here at your own nursery.
My pleasure, and it's wonderful to have you visit, I must say. Yes.
So the IUCN SSC has more than 160 specialist groups. There's one for whales, there's one for cacti, there's one for xenarthrans, which are anteater sloths and armadillos, and then there's a carnivorous plant specialist group. This includes about 11,000 volunteers who are part of the specialist group. And where does the carnivorous plant specialist group fall into all of these numbers and all of these people?
Well, the whole idea of the Species Survival Commission, SSC, is that almost every organism on Earth is represented. You know, fungi, there's one for mollusks, there's all sorts. And of course, there has to be one for carnivorous plants. So they're grouped thematically. So carnivorous plants, you know, they're not in one particular region or something like that. So we fit in that we actually handle quite a large number of different carnivorous plants, and we document their conservation status. That's one of the primary, but not the only role that we play.
Right, so we've all heard the labels endangered, critically endangered, threatened, and least concern. And the IUCN specialist groups are responsible for creating those labels.
Yes. Not everybody agrees we should have a label called least concern, because it rather takes away all attention from it. But yes, we assess data from scientists around the world very, very carefully under certain criteria and come up with these classifications. It's quite a process.
So you're the co-chair of the Carnivorous Plant Specialist Group, and I'm actually a member of the Xenarthran Specialist Group, which are the anteater sloths and armadillos. And for that group of organisms that are closely related to each other, and that's why they're their own specialist group, there's about 40 species of Xenarthrans, and we have about 30 to 35 members in the specialist group. And depending on who you talk to, there's between 800 and 1,000 species of carnivorous plants. So how big is the carnivorous plant specialist group?
Well, we have two types of membership. We have general members who are just interested and contribute a bit of data. Specialist members who may be interested in particular genus of carnivorous plant, and they may have visited. You know, if you visited somewhere remote and you've observed a carnivorous plant in the wild that maybe not many people have seen, we're interested in talking to you to get the data together. So you're welcome to be a member in that regard. We keep the core membership fairly small. We need a specialist member who's qualified for each genus of carnivorous plants, so Sarracenias and Utricularias or whatever it might be. Of course, some of them are quite simple. There's only one species in the genus, you know, so others are more complex.
Right. And if you had to grade the specialist group on the assessments or the number of species you've been able to assess over the years, how are we doing?
Well, frankly, not badly at all. What happened is I actually became a member of the specialist group in the 1980s. I was a guy who donated information to them. And then I think the last chair was Dr. Jan Schlauer, if I recall correctly. And it fell into, it basically became defunct for a long period of time. In 2012, I realized that it was defunct and volunteered to set it up again, which was quite a process. So you're asking how we're doing. We started out with all the carnivorous plants. Any assessments that existed were either massively out of date, like decades in most cases, or sometimes species that were no longer recognized as species have been assessed. It was a real complete, you know, I wouldn't say it was a mess, and all due respect to Jan, he's a fabulous taxonomist. But it was in great need of overhaul. So we slowly, one by one, Dr. Charles Clark was taking care of the Nepenthes. One by one, Shen Li was one of our specialists. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he goes into the jungle a great deal, and he's a scientist, an ecologist. He was sending back data. So we were gradually getting the assessments done again, or done for the first time. And my job was to go through, as I'm trained to actually go through the assessments and actually understand how they work, check them, review them before they then go to it's a very rigorous process. They then go to Cambridge, the headquarters for final, before they're published. So it takes about 2 years to get them published from the assessment being submitted.
Yeah, and it definitely seems like a Herculean task with 1,000 species in the specialist group.
Yeah, it's more than Herculean. It's impossible because it's never ending, because they need to be reassessed regularly because of the change in the environment, in change in the habitat, the changes due to poaching, and whatever factors, pressures that they face are changing all the time. And of course, sometimes, thankfully, a new colony of something which was previously critically endangered is discovered somewhere else, and it's pristine. So we can then reassess the whole thing and downgrade it, which we like to do if it's possible.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that there's 11,000 members, but they're all volunteers. They don't get paid by the IUCN.
Oh, I wish.
So
No.
In addition to being a volunteer, some of the members of the specialist groups have to pay for their own training to be able to do the assessment. And I know you said you went to Cambridge, but if you become a member, which you have to be invited, there are some online courses to learn how to do the assessment.
You're correct. I mean, when I did it, I flew to Cambridge at my own expense. I think they gave me the hotel. You don't pay for the course, but you pay your expenses. So they didn't have a budget for actually training people if you wanted to go there. But yes, you can do it online, and the courses are good online. So quite a few of our specialists have done the online courses. The advantage of doing it in person, of course, is you get to discuss with the top experts, the people right at the top of it, the ins and outs of it a little bit more than you would do with an online course.
All right, so we've mentioned species being assessed many times. So what does that actually mean?
Well, many times.
But, in this conversation, we haven't actually defined what being assessed.
Oh, I see. I thought you meant, yes, okay. Yeah. Well, a species with plants is is quite almost a contentious subject. So I would just say that the definition of a species, in my opinion, is we as human beings like to put things into a box, into a category, so we know what it is. It's in this box and it belongs to that species. But actually, there's so much overlap with a lot of carnivorous plants because of interbreeding, and also hybrid swarms can become stable. So actually, there's a lot of overlap, and it depends which taxonomist you're talking to as to whether that's a distinct species, or whether that species should be split into even 8 different subspecies, or even renamed as new species. That's called splitting. So there are taxonomists that specialize in splitting. I don't wish to upset taxonomists, but they do live mostly in an academic publish or perish world, and they have to publish papers. And then a few years later, another taxonomist will come along and say, no, they're all too similar. They should all be one species, and they put them back again. So they're lumping and splitting, which of course is a bit confusing for us. But if you look at the CITES list of species, they are the IUCN are the scientific body for CITES, in that CITES take what we tell them is a species, and they actually adopt it. And that is generally the CITES list is what the world adopts, like USDA in the US, for example.
Yeah. So once you're able to identify a species, then you're looking at populations, threats to that species, the distribution. That's how they get those labels: endangered, critically endangered, threatened, least concern.
Yes. It's the extent of occurrence, the area of occurrence of different things. There are innumerable factors. Which is why some things are data deficient, and I think maybe we might talk about that later. I'm not sure, but there's a reason why they're data deficient. We just don't have enough information on them yet. So yeah.
All right. So you mentioned hybridization swarms. It can happen in Nepenthes. It can definitely happen in Sarracenia. Are conservationists or the specialist group, are you concerned about these hybridization swarms that are happening naturally?
Concerned in what regard? I mean, in terms of...
saving genetic variation or species?
Well, I'm not saying it's necessarily due to hybridization swarms, but even within a fairly stable species, if you take the 300 seeds that come from a Nepenthes seed pod head, for example, you'll get quite a bit of variation in them. And then it's possible that somebody may say, oh, that's a little bit different than that one. It's not necessarily a hybrid, but it's different from that one because it's got a hairier tendril. And they'll come along and they'll publish a paper and put it in a fancy book, which weighs a great deal of printed on very heavy paper, maybe, and useful as doorstops. They'll put them into a book, really just without real scientific foundation, and that's then put forward, maybe published. If you look at publications, by the way, check to see if it's peer reviewed or just in a journal which is not peer reviewed. Because there's a lot of stuff in books and non-peer reviewed journals that really one should be very careful about taking as fact. But if we split, if a species, Mirabilis is a good example. I know that some very good people have worked on this and did the splitting. I'm not knocking their work at all. But it makes the conservation more difficult because if you take Mirabilis and you split it into, as in Thailand, various different new species, it makes it more difficult to conserve it because we've got to conserve maybe 8 species now and assess them all and decide which ones we want to push forward as being, come on guys, please don't develop this piece of jungle because this species will become extinct. That happened with Suratensis, Nepenthes suratensis in Thailand. We even got Sir David Attenborough to write to the Queen of Thailand, to the Prime Minister. He was very, very helpful. And we got a whole development moved, which was a huge task to save Suratensis. But is Suratensis a distinct species or not? Was that really worth the effort or not? It's debatable. I'm not saying either way.
Yeah, because there's a finite amount of attention in addition to resources. So it's hard when you separate these similar looking Nepenthes or species.
And we have a clash as well when a species is newly discovered, it may be a distinct species, the taxonomist who publishes it inevitably would like to see it classified as critically endangered if possible because it gives it more impact for them. And they will, in some cases, write the assessment for the IUCN and it comes out as critically endangered, but that's my job when I review it, to argue with them. Doesn't always go down well because they may be very, very, very qualified taxonomists and hey, who am I? I don't have a degree in the biological sciences even. But if I can find a problem with it, then I have to do that. So we try to limit the numbers which are critically endangered because otherwise we're spreading our efforts too thin.
So I love to think about the evolution of carnivorous plants, and this might be an ethical question, but why should we, the ICPS members, conservationists, why should we care if there's a population that has like a slightly different peristome? I know like several Drosera species, you'll have like lots of white flowers and then there'll be a handful of ones that have pink flowers. Like, why do we care that there's genetic diversity in populations?
I'm going to flip that question. Do you care?
Well, I know that collectors and hobbyists care about location data. And I know like Andreas Fleischmann hates location data because he's like, that's not helpful for the long, and I'm paraphrasing, and I hope I'm getting it right from what I took from the Vienna conference, but he doesn't see a value in subpopulations of the big species. What
about, for example, you're interviewing me, but I'm still interested in your views. Dionea, for example, all the different forms of Dionea that are being isolated, should they be split into different species, do you think? Would there be any value in that?
It'd probably be too difficult to pool money or pool resources to take care of all of.
You've got it. That's exactly the same thing that I feel with Nepenthes, at least, which is my speciality. I've only recently stepped down as chair. I'm not stepped down, but I stepped back as chair. I'm now co-chair because Marcel van der Broek, who's been working with me in the group for a very long time, he's now more active than I am because I'm taking a bit of a leave of absence as I've got a lot of big projects on. But he'd be another one to talk to about this. But in my opinion, we've got our hands full with the 800 species we've got. We don't need any more unless they're genuinely new species which are being discovered, But to split species that have been established for decades into subspecies or into individual species, in my opinion, makes our work a lot harder.
Yeah. All right, so now we're going to talk about field conservation and threats. Climate change is altering a lot of things, including rainfall and temperature. Do you have groups or regions of carnivorous plants that are being affected by climate change more severely?
Oh, very definitely. Climate change is something which has come to the fore in recent years, but there was a climate change section at Cambridge University when I started this specialist group again in 2012, studying climate change. And in a IUCN meeting in Abu Dhabi, I was talking to them, and they impressed upon me just how serious this was going to be. And it is, because climate change is a major factor in certain carnivorous plants. And in lots of other ways as well, because climate change can affect people's needs and wants and migration, where they go and live, and they've got to live somehow, and they can find a way to make a living by selling carnivorous plants that they've collected from the wild. They'll do it. But the direct impact of climate change, if you have a niche endemic, say growing on a knife edge ridge in Borneo, the knife edge ridge can be very narrow, just the width of this nursery, maybe 18 feet, 6 meters wide, and then it drops away, and the plant only grows along that ridge, pretty much. Very few plants grow down the side. If the humidity drops because of climate change, less rainfall, the moss will die. The moss is critical for the survival of the plants, and it's not just Nepenthes or carnivorous plants, it's other plants and animals. There's a whole knock-on effect. So that's climate change, and of course deforestation causes the equivalent effect as well, up these slopes lower down.
Many carnivorous plants rely on specific soils like sphagnum, bogs, or ultramafic soils. Is there a go-to way to protect these environments?
We can all try and use less things which are peat-based for growing, but that's very difficult to avoid. We use entirely coir fibre in these nurseries, you might have noticed. Nepenthes, a lot of them will grow a bit better in peat, and we could import it here, but I'd rather not, because it's detrimental to the environment. Other things we can do generally for conservation or for the planet are more direct, and that's not related directly to what you're discussing, but obviously reduce the use of one-use plastics. Terrible thing. If you're going to buy a little widget this big in a big plastic case that big for no apparent reason, it's a very sad thing, but you sometimes need that widget. Got little choice. But it's that's the manufacturers. And bottled water, we try to avoid buying that as much as possible.
Yeah, but everyone can do their part by not getting one item shipped to their house every day. Or conserving your general use of water, not having a non-native grass lawn.
One of my major hobbies is I dive, scuba dive. I'm a dive master and a technical diver, and I've been in parts of the ocean which are otherwise pristine, and there's just swirls of plastic. I mean, it's obscene. So yeah, I'm getting off the point of the IUCN, but the IUCN, we can do a little bit for it, and certainly when it comes to peat, if you're buying peat, if you can figure out where it actually came from, whether it might have been detrimental to the habitat when it was collected, or whether it's from some area which is more sustainable.
Yeah, everything has a life cycle cost.
Yeah, this is true. This is true. It's a scientific principle as well that if you measure something, you change it. Us just being on this planet, we're affecting everything all the time, but that's general.
All right. So another threat to carnivorous plants and lots of plants is illegal poaching. How big of an impact in the year 2025, 2026 do you think poaching is?
In a word, massive.
Massive.
Massive. In my opinion, one of the things is when a new species is discovered, whether it's iconic or attractive or not, there are certain groups of collectors in certain countries in particular, I'm not talking about the US actually, who they've got to have it in their collection. They collect them like stamps. So they say they've got 17 or 80 species or whatever it might be in their collection. So they'll go straight there and collect it, which is why we don't publish the locale data when something's newly discovered. We try and keep that out of the public domain as much as possible. We know about the poaching because when we revisit a site, we can see that the plants have been taken. Also, you know that poachers go there a lot when the guides who take you there, and sometimes sadly the park rangers, if it's a national park, this has happened, will come to you with the plants in their hands, expecting you to want to buy it from them. So you can't really blame them sometimes because they're so poor. But they're encouraged by the poachers to actually do this, and then some of them will mail them to the poachers' home addresses. So there's quite a lot going on.
Yeah, I just went to Uganda and we went to go see some Utricularia and Drosera. And as soon as we got there, the guides took their socks and shoes off, went in the water and picked up a big handful of Utricularia gibba.
There you go.
To show us. And we're like, oh, no, we were just here to photograph it.
There's we're in Sri Lanka right now, and there's national parks here. And Sri Lanka is very advanced in this regard in that it's the opposite way round. There was a case some years ago where a fairly well-known carnivorous plant grower from Europe came here, and he went to Horton Plains, which is somewhere I think you're going tomorrow morning, with a pair of scissors and some plastic bags, and took a few Utricularia from the bogs there. The forest rangers, far from helping them to actually collect it, they were arrested at the gate and they were deported the following day, having been fined. So this country is quite advanced in its thinking when it comes to conservation and biopiracy, biodiversity. But that's not sadly the same in many other countries. Yet. But it's about education. You know about education, don't you?
Yes, definitely. All right, so we're going to take a quick break because I want to tell you about two exciting ICPS events, International Carnivorous Plant Society events that are happening in the year 2026. In May, in North Carolina, we're going to have the first ever Symposium and Expo, where we're going to have hourly guest speakers. We're going to have over 60 vendors, and some of the speakers that we have lined up right now include, and their photos are appearing on the screen as we speak, Dr. Allison Northrup. She's a nursery owner, and she's going to be talking about landscaping for conservation. Jeremiah Harris is going to be talking about how to grow Guinness World Record Venus flytraps. Joey Santor from Crime Pays But Botany Doesn't. He's going to be giving two presentations about traveling around the world seeing carnivorous plants. Jared Chauncey from the Missouri Botanical Gardens. He's going to be talking about the history of growing carnivorous plants for the past couple hundred years. Mike Helrich is going to be talking about how to grow Nepenthes. Johnny Randall, the retired director of conservation for the North Carolina Botanical Gardens, he's going to be talking about a conservation project that the ICPS funded about 10 years ago for Venus flytraps. Max Kodalinki is from the Atlanta Botanical Garden. He's going to be giving a presentation about growing carnivorous plants outdoors. And then Dan Walker, who's a representative of the local chapter of native plants for North Carolina, he's also going to be presenting. So this is going to be a huge event in the US. Everyone's welcome. And if you are a regular full-time member of the ICPS, you get to attend this event for free. So it's going to be lots of people there, lots of vendors there, lots of speakers, and you get to mingle with everyone. Then later in the year, in August, the third week of August, we're going to have the 15th International Carnivorous Plant Society Conference. And that also has lots of vendors, lots of presenters, maybe some roundtables. Rob might be there to participate.
I only just learned about this 2 days ago, so you know, I'm not been keeping my ear to the ground, but yes, maybe.
And then at the conferences, they're kind of famous for their conference dinners where you get to mingle with everyone. And then I love the breakfast, lunches, and dinners and drinks, which are not part of the agenda, but it's where you get to talk to famous people and not so famous people, but you get to talk to other cultivars, see what's working in France compared to Texas. And it's a good networking opportunity, but it's also a good way to show your support in the community because the ICPS is all about cultivation and conservation.
Well, I've been going to ICPS functions or conferences on and off since 2000, or was it 2002, which was in San Francisco. Yep. Met the great Peter D'Amato, and you know, they've always been great. Leiden is a fantastic venue for it as well. I'm so sorry, I forgot to mention that it's in Leiden, the Netherlands. just giving you a little nudge there. But yeah, well, I hope all the speaker slots are filled already as I'm going. But if somebody drops out, so maybe somebody should be assassinated for the purpose. If somebody drops out, then I'll fill that, because I would hope that speakers get airfares, hotels, and a huge bar tab as well. So, yeah.
And I didn't mention the speakers for the Leiden conference because they haven't been published yet. But if you go to carnivorousplants.org, you can see both the North Carolina Symposium and you can see the ICPS conference agendas, hotel information, conference information.
Super. I highly recommend it because I've yet to be at one that hasn't been extremely enjoyable.
Yeah. And we're back from that commercial that I just created off the top of my head. Dr. Kadeem Gilbert, who I met at the Japan conference, and then I asked him to be my roommate at the Vienna conference to save money. He asks, what percentage of Nepenthes in your estimation are data deficient? Do you think we have an accurate picture of the health of most carnivorous plant wild populations?
About 10% or 8 to 10%, if I recall correctly, of the assessments for carnivorous plants in general are data deficient.
Okay.
It's probably increasing because there's a lot of new species being described, some of which, in my opinion, may not be valid and hold for very long. Others are definitely valid. They're some of them quite iconic. When they're first discovered, what happens is that the person who discovers it probably doesn't take scientific measurements, or they find their plant, especially their taxonomists, they want their pressing, they want to publish that plant, and you actually ask them information about the conservation status in the area, what's the extent of occurrence, and they've got very scant information. So we haven't got enough data to actually assess it properly, but we know that species exists. That's when it becomes, so they nearly always start off data deficient. Then somebody has to go back and actually spend some time, you know, finding out where does it grow all the way over this mountain, is it on the next mountain, you know, and as the information we get is continuously evolving, so we can then make an assessment, and that assessment may change over the years as more data comes in. The other one is species which have been assessed many years ago. Clossii is a good example, Nepenthes clossii. We can't get back there to find out what's happened to it because it's such a dangerous area. Even the intrepid Shen Li, who's the bravest explorer I've ever known, has been there, isn't keen to go back. So we have no idea, for example, if it might be even extinct in the wild. We don't know. So that's one that we can't really reassess. It's not data deficient, I beg your pardon. It is assessed, but it is now technically data deficient in that we can't say that the assessment's correct. It probably is not.
Do you ever think about, so I went to Japan, I saw this beautiful cliffside of Drosera, and the tour guide goes, oh, they all disappear, you know, in the dry season. And then there's a seed bank.
Yep.
And then they come back.
Yeah. If
the rain comes. Do we think of, I'm sure the Drosera specialist group member knows about that, but, you know, annual plants. How do we do annual plants?
Well, I mean,
I know it's tricky, but
it's a tricky one. It's a very broad subject, isn't it? Nepenthes, for example, not many people realize that Nepenthes alba marginata in its primary natural habitat is burned out every year, completely down to the ground along with the surrounding vegetation. But it's got a big root system and it comes back very, very fast. And it enables it to maintain its foothold on not be overgrown by other plants.
So there's experts who know those plants and who can monitor the population over time.
Yep.
Fernando Rivadavia, who is great fun at the ICPS conferences.
Yes, I know Fernando.
He says, it seems way too easy for irresponsible hobbyists to purchase poached plants through the mail. What can be done to help improve and enforce international anti-poaching laws?
It's very difficult. We have collated data from primary marketplaces such as eBay. And these poachers are advertising very openly on eBay. And the problem is that once they put something in a parcel and send it, say, if I may use the United States as an example, you've got millions of parcels arriving every day probably into the USPS postal system, United States postal system. And if they label them as clothing or something, they're probably going to get through. I've never heard of a bust happening. This is not CITES I'm talking about. CITES is another subject. I've never heard of it. It's illegal to actually send plants through the post without the proper documentation, like a phytosanitary certificate. They're never with the plants. So it's very difficult to intercept them after they've actually hit a postal service. We have actually had a successful bust done in Malaysia where we got enough data on a poacher to inform the Malaysian authorities, and to the best of my knowledge, they arrested him at the post office. They actually intercepted him at the post office where he was sending this stuff labeled as clothing or gifts and arrested him. What then became of him, we don't know, but he faced some severe penalty. So it's very difficult, and it is a major issue. I can just appeal to our viewers here, who hopefully are responsible growers and scientists in some cases, of course. Please look at the provenance of the plants you're buying. If you're buying off eBay, and it's coming directly from the country of origin, it's more than likely been poached, which is extremely detrimental to the survival of the species in the wild in most cases.
So let's keep talking about local communities and ecotourism. Tracking and habitat access has never been easier. And unfortunately, there's some pinpoints, GPS coordinates for certain plants. How can we balance people who want to see plants in situ with habitat degradation?
Okay.
How can we be responsible ecotourists for carnivorous plants?
Well, firstly, if you want to get the best out of your time and your trip, it would be good if it's organized by somebody who knows the plants, who knows where to take you, who gets all the right permits, who does it properly, ensures that nobody in the group is going to wild collect the plants or even the seeds, which is sometimes illegal as well in many countries. I always use Shen Li as a shining example of this, because he's an extremely interesting ecologist, not just plants but animals as well. So if you go on a trip with Shen, he will take you to the mountain. He will ensure that it's minimum impact on the plants in the wild, and it's all done legally and correctly. That's, in my opinion, the best way to do it. I think it's very valuable to go and see the plants in the wild, because only by seeing the true beauty of the natural habitat and how they should be, how they grow naturally, can you get a full appreciation of the wonder of them and the importance to conserve the environment. But also, if you're growing the plants, there is no substitute for actually getting the feel of what the environment is like where those plants have actually come from, rather than just a greenhouse or what you read on the internet. But if you just go on an unorganized tour with a bunch of people, just go crashing through the jungle, you can do so much damage inadvertently, because some of these niche endemics grow in a tiny area in maybe sphagnum moss forest, and it takes ages to regenerate after a whole bunch of people have come through and maybe camp there and chop down small trees to make their tents or shelters and things. So it should be done responsibly. So David Attenborough and I have discussed this, and he's dead against actually fencing areas off to stop people going to the areas at all. He thinks that they should be accessible, but it should be controlled. And he's probably seen more of this planet than anybody alive when it comes to the natural history. So I respect his views, and I think he's right.
So local communities often are like the base camp of a mountain or a region where there's wild carnivorous plants. How can conservationists incorporate and utilize the local communities so they maybe see the value in the plants, want to also help conserve the plants?
I think it boils down to one word, Kenny, which is a word close to your heart, is education. If you go there and you hire guides to take you up a mountain, impress upon them from the word go. This is if you're doing it yourself. Yeah. Obviously, if someone like Shen does it or Red Fern is doing it, it hopefully will be done for you. But go there, impress upon them. You do not wish to collect wild plants. In fact, the opposite, you'll be upset. Please don't touch the plants. We've come to photograph them and look at them, and we will pay you accordingly. Don't worry about it. You don't need to come running. Like the very first time I went to Mount Sibuyan, the first Nepenthes sibuyanensis I saw was in a guide's hand, because he thought, because he's been educated by the poachers, to go and collect the plants for the people who are on that mountain. So we can tell them, you can conserve it's your resource, it's your land, it's your country, but please don't degrade it. You can conserve it for future generations and for yourselves by not actually collecting the plants. And we don't want to collect the plants. We want to actually look at them.
You mentioned earlier that you and David Attenborough wrote letters to the Thai government trying to protect a species. Do you think national governments take carnivorous plants seriously? Do they value them as much as us? Or is the charismatic megafauna like a polar bear, panda bear, a blue whale,
well, I mean, you know the answer to that question, but
they overshadow a beautiful Nepenthes.
Talking about Nepenthes, unfortunately, there are not too many polar bears, pandas, or blue whales swimming around Nepenthes.
Right.
Not that iconic. But what we do in the specialist group, and are increasingly doing, and Marcel is pushing this forward with Dr. Martin Cheek, who's very active in the specialist group now, and some others as well. They're very, very good. Is when we find something which we feel is critically endangered, we look at the mountain, and what's the cause? Is it open cast mining, which is often a big thing, where they just or logging, often a big thing as well. And we talk to the other specialist groups, particularly amphibians, because they probably got endangered critters actually in that area as well. So we can pool our resources. We can't put pressure on internationally, but we can simply provide awareness that, look, you're losing a resource here, which is important for future generations and for you. Please, can you do something about it? But that's not putting pressure on. We have no ability in the IUCN to put any political pressure on. The best we could ever do was what we did with Sir David Attenborough, was to get a letter written by him, which actually moved mountains, almost literally.
Yeah. All right, so now we're going to talk about propagation, horticulture, and economics. And I think we may, in the very near future, mention the definition of sustainability. A long time ago, people saw it as 3 pillars of people, profit, and planet, where they're like supporting sustainability. But now we view it as these overlapping circles, because people do need to make money to live. And we have to think about the health of people. And then we also have to balance that with the ecosystems. And a few years ago, you participated in an ICPS roundtable about breeding Nepenthes, and I moderated it. And I was informed, I did not know this back then, that if a Nepenthes cross doesn't make like 300 seeds, it's like not that high of a yield. So my question is, let's say we have an endangered plant, they're dioecious, so you need to have a male and a female. You breed them, you get 300 seeds. What's preventing us from making 10,000 of them in micropropagation? Nothing.
Basically, I think the more artificially propagated Nepenthes out there, the better. You're talking about hybrids, right? just for that, they only have value, not scientific value as such. They have value for commercial propagation, but also for people to enjoy and become interested in the plants themselves. So it's got an educational aspect to it. When it comes to breeding, and everybody out there who's got Nepenthes can play a part in this, when it comes to breeding endangered species and critically endangered species, which we specialize in doing that, from legally obtained plants, there is a possibility of actually preserving the plant in ex-situ conservation. Rather, if it's going to go extinct in the wild, we have something left. Yeah.
So what we were just talking about is putting seeds in micropropagation and mass producing them. And some people say that Nepenthes are difficult to micropropagate from like a cutting or a piece of tissue due to internal contamination. And I have figured out that that means that there's contamination internally, but what does that mean? What's the bad stuff that's inside the Nepenthes?
Okay, Nepenthes and a few other plant types of plants, some orchids and things are very similar. As they exist in the wild, they become contaminated internally with organisms that they can live with. It doesn't seem to bother the plants too much. Fungi, particularly, and many different strains of bacteria will be inside a Nepenthes plant. The longer it's been, the older it is, the longer it's been in an outdoor environment. And the wild plants, for example, are heavily internally contaminated. What that means is that when you try and put it into tissue culture, to say you have the last remaining, the last Mohican of Nepenthes sitting on a mountain, you only have one plant. You know, it'd be great to put it into tissue culture straight from that plant. Extremely difficult, because in the process of removing the contaminants from the plant tissue, you're very likely and very probably going to kill the actual plant material at the same time. So it's exceedingly difficult, but not impossible. And we have done it, to take plants from a nursery environment or the wild, which we haven't done because we don't touch plants in the wild, and put them into tissue culture, which is a bit of a shame, because behind us here we've got some of the very original Rob Cantley eyes, the original 6 clones that we bred from. And it'd be lovely to actually put the Queen of Hearts and the King of Spades into tissue culture.
Right.
I won't say we're not working on it, but it's not an easy task.
All right, so now we're going to talk about CITES, which we did briefly mention earlier. CITES stands for the Convention of International Trade for Endangered Species. And at the ICPS Japan conference, Leo Song and I had a private conversation, which I hope he doesn't mind me sharing right now. He said that the CITES doesn't really work well for plants because if there's one rhino left, and there has been some like duck species where there's only like one female duck left, you can't take a feather, take a piece of the rhino and make 10,000 of them. But for some plants, you can. So maybe his question would be, or my question is, do you agree with that assessment about the CITES?
Well, dear Leo, that question is now out in the public domain. So if you're ever thinking of applying for a job with CITES, I wouldn't bother putting in the application. But I completely agree. You give me an example of one CITES bust compared to the vast amounts of paperwork required. When we ship our plants from here, all our plants are artificially propagated. Every mother plant has been raised from seeds, which is why we didn't sell anything for nearly 10 years to our great financial detriment, but that's what we wanted to do. So, but even so, we have to get massive amounts of permits to export, which is okay, we can do that. But importing into, say, Europe, every single plant, every single variety has to have 4 copies of an import permit. So we're shipping 200 varieties for a major flower show. The permits can sometimes weigh over a kilogram. A kilogram. And then each one has to be signed and stamped by customs at the other end, which can take 2 days because they don't want to do it before the plants can clear, in which time they're dying in the boxes. It is extremely difficult to ship endangered or CITES listed plants, not necessarily endangered, they're just listed. And there's nothing endangered about Nepenthes gracilis or Nepenthes mirabilis, but they're listed. It's extremely difficult to ship them legally. What that means, it's just giving the poachers more power, because they can do things we can't do, and they do things we can't do because we don't break the law, and they do. So in my opinion, CITES works against itself, at least with the plants that we deal with. Animals, it might work for ivory. You know, everyone recognizes a piece of ivory, and an elephant is massively iconic. CITES, marvelous. Plants, Really doesn't work. And orchids were all under CITES at one time as well, but they were removed from the CITES lists simply because of the commercial pressures, because the orchid industry is so huge. No other reason. The reason CITES give for listing these things is that the customs officers can't tell the difference between one species and another, so you could be sending an endangered species labeled as a common species. True enough, that goes for orchids as well. But it really doesn't work. So orchids now, most of them don't need CITES permits. If they're Appendix 2, that you don't have to ship it with CITES permits. Unfortunately for us, because we're very small, we don't have the commercial pressures the orchid industry has. We have to go along with this. And I wouldn't like to think how many hundreds of kilograms of CITES permits pages have been shipped and how many trees went into being chopped down for the permits that were issued. It's a huge industry in itself issuing these permits.
Yeah. Lots of jobs are created.
So I agree with and if Leo. I may tell a little story about Leo. Leo, the song is a very well-known senior figure in the carnivorous plant world, and we were doing a little tiny exhibition at the ICPS conference in Tokyo years ago, and Diana, my wife, who is a perfectionist, was trying to set the exhibition up, and she needed some help, and she will just recruit people. She had Professor Kondo, who and said, "Can you help?" He came and helped. And Leo's song was watching on, and she said, can you give me a hand to pop these plants up?" And Leo came in, rolled up the sleeves. Diana then took him into the toilets, into the restrooms, where she had sinks full of water and all the Coir fibre. And Leo obligingly helped. I'm sure he'll remember this. Helped pop these things up. And I think somebody said to me, "Hey, Rob, do you know who that is?"
Diana can be persuasive.
She's an extremely focused person when it comes to doing a plant exhibition. She's got to get a gold medal, otherwise she'll be in tears. Yes, it's very true.
All right, so now we're going to talk about in-situ and ex-situ conservation. And in-situ means like in place of. So that's when people try to save the plants in their native habitat.
Yep.
And ex-situ is out of their native habitat. And most people will argue that in-situ conservation is kind of superior to ex-situ conservation. And I would love to hear your thoughts on that, because it's very difficult to save certain ecosystems when you have different religious sects and governments and interests, mining and timber logging and right?
Exactly.
So
I think the two, ex-situ and in-situ, work. It should be, they work in parallel. Yes, of course, we'd love to save all the environments and never have anything go extinct in the wild. That is not going to happen with the best will in the world from everybody concerned. Climate change itself is going to make sure that doesn't happen. When they become extinct in the wild, and we've got examples like Nepenthes clippiata, where the only ones hanging in there are on the cliffs where poachers can't quite reach them. When they become extinct in the wild, not if, I'm sad to say, all that's left is what we've got in ex-situ. Ex-situ means in cultivation, or in seed banks. That's very important as well, is illegally collecting the seeds. But breeding the plants ex-situ, once you've got a legally obtained collection of plants, if you can breed species that are endangered, not necessarily critically endangered, because endangered ones are moving inexorably towards critically endangered in most cases, then you can help, because the more they're disseminated, the better. When we first found Rob Cantley, we realized that eventually it wasn't truncata. We disseminated it as widely as possible at a reasonable price and gave it to botanic gardens all over the world, because we felt it was on the way to becoming extinct in Mindanao. As that happens, I think there might be some more colonies, but it's important, very important to breed these plants, and ex-situ conservation and in-situ, I think, should work in parallel.
Yeah. So for animals, inbreeding can be a problem. What's required to make ex-situ conservation work? So we mentioned that the Nepenthes, for instance, come in both male and female. So you're going to need at least 2 clones or 2 of the same species, but you might have 2 boys. So let's say you need a dozen or something to make sure you have at least one of each sex. But do you or conservationists think about genetic diversity? I understand if there's only 16 clippiatas or 12 on a mountain, you can only get so much genetic diversity and seed from that.
But within the seed is bound up the genetics of the ancestors, which are probably gone. So with something like Clippiata, it's not very variable in its form or color. So for commercial purposes, the only necessity is just to have one clone and sell it to hobbyists and make money. What we do is we maintain a gene bank of many clones for no good commercial reason, but because I feel it's very important, because in those different clones, even though they look similar, the different genetics. You mentioned the male and female. That's a very obvious one. I mean, you probably know that there's more boys than girls in the Nepenthes world. So if you have two plants, you're probably going to be unlucky. You need more than that. So you need males and females, but also the genetic diversity. If you have a grex of Nepenthes seeds, in other words, one seed head, what comes out of it, there's different vigors and different colorations and all those things for most Nepenthes. So genetic diversity is extremely important. So we keep at ridiculous expense backup clones of everything, even if it's not necessary for commercial purposes. Not very popular with my shareholders, but they are mostly philanthropists, and we're now building a facility which is going to make all this very feasible.
If you had unlimited resources, what single conservation project would you launch for carnivorous plants?
Where I would build a gigantic tissue culture laboratory with investors who are philanthropic enough to understand that maybe 5% of its capacity should go towards conservation work. Exactly what you just said, maintaining a gene bank. We also have seed banks, and Millennium Seed Bank in Kew is one of the well-known ones, but they exist all over the place in the US and everything else, where they may or may not be viable when we actually want to use them. Maintaining clones, a gene bank of endangered plants, I'm not talking about just Nepenthes now, across the whole range, in tissue culture, as many clones as we can actually afford to keep, I think will be important one day, because if they become extinct in the wild, it's all we've got left. And maybe one day there'll be a chance to reforest or repopulate the wild.
And there's a famous tech bro who's going to terraform Mars. And bring the human population up there and repopulate with plants and animals. But I heard a famous scientist say, if we have the technology to do that to a different planet, we can do that here on Earth. So we can recreate ecosystems, or save them at least. All right, wrapping up, what role do you see the next generation of hobbyists playing? And what advice, what words of wisdom do you have for growers?
Keep doing what you're doing. I think we're moving in the right direction. The interest in we're talking about conservation in particular, the interest in the wonders of these plants, their uniqueness in conservation in general is ramping up. Keep growing the plants, enjoy the plants, but if you can, maybe if you've got a rare species that's a female that's flowering, and you know somebody who's got pollen of the same species, instead of making a hybrid, recreate that species and send it to your friends. You know, I shouldn't be saying this for commercial reasons. It's not making us any money, but it's important to actually disseminate these plants as widely as possible. So you're doing the right. Everyone's doing the right thing. We're just doing our best, really, for this planet. And what you said about terraforming Mars would be great, because you've got one mega wealthy person who can do it the way he wants to do it. As a physicist, as a former physicist, by the way, I still think there's enormous technological hurdles to accompany. I mean, just the gamma radiation, the cosmic rays, the issues are getting there. But
so what I hear you saying is you're going to stay on Earth. I'm
going to stay on Earth, but the problem is here is as you touched upon, it's all the different governments have different. That's for whom the bell tolls. All the different governments have their different priorities, and governments change, and their whole attitude will change, and an entire philosophy for conservation or protection of the environment can suddenly change overnight when the guy gets out of the bed on the other side.
Right?
Enough said.
I understand what you're saying. All right, final question. Looking ahead, what's one goal you would like to see the Carnivorous Plant Specialist Group achieve in the next 10 years?
That's a big question. The person who should really answer that would be my successor, would be Marcel. But I would like to see us update as many as possible of the assessments and get them accurate. And when things are critically endangered, we need to look at why, we need to look at what we can do about it in situ. If there's anything we can do to help it in situ, at the same time, we need to look at that one for ex-situ conservation more carefully and try to do the parallel work I discussed between in-situ and ex-situ. They should work in parallel.
And something that we haven't mentioned in this video yet is that just a few years ago, the Carnivorous Plant Specialist Group, you assessed and looked at 450 species, which is maybe half. Well, which is a big task.
It was a big task, but it was done with the aid of fantastic volunteers. Dr. Adam Cross from Australia, he came all the way from Australia. It was hosted by the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. They gave us all the facilities for 5 days, after which we had to give a talk about what we'd achieved. But we actually assessed, we sat in a darkened room for five days, and specialists from all over the world, a bit of sponsorship from philanthropists sponsored us. Google actually helped a little bit as well, to fly people from all over the world, and the IUCN gave us a grant to sit and do what's known as a workshop. And we assessed 450 species approximately, which out of the 800 carnivorous plant species to 1,000 carnivorous plant species is a big chunk. We really pushed the agenda forward on that. I think a workshop is a very good way of doing this, rather than people working individually from home. So we all worked together, and it was tough actually, but it was very enjoyable and very satisfying.
Thank you so much, Rob, for talking to me today. And the ICPS has a conservation fund. If you feel obliged to look at our projects and maybe support some, you can also go to the IUCN's website and learn more. So thank you so much, Rob.
Thank you very much, Kenny. It's been a pleasure.